Thanks, Anne. Good morning, everyone. Damien McCarthy, HR and Payroll, Human Resource Management Consultancy and Payroll Outsourcing Service. So for businesses reopening and returning to work, obviously, first and foremost, health and safety is going to be paramount. The return to work protocol is an excellent policy that deals with everything that employers need to support employees returning to work. So I'm going to be discussing this morning, I suppose, the people side of it, your staff, your teams returning to work. A lot of them may be anxious, they may have a lot of questions. So obviously a good induction is going to be a very important part of this. But just to touch on a few key points quickly, it's very important now as businesses are reopening that they are planning strategically and that they are getting that buy-in from their people who are going to be returning to work. So communication is key and engagement is key. But it's important to remember that both employers and employees have responsibilities as part of the return to work protocol. And to make a business successful in reopening, flexibility, patience, compassion, and understanding is needed by everyone, not just the employer, but the employee as well. Just to move into the return to work protocol a little bit more. Important again to remember that both the employer and employees have responsibilities. Employers should have regular and meaningful engagement with their workers and their teams. A workplace will appoint at least one lead worker representative charged with ensuring that COVID-19 measures are strictly adhered to in the place of work. This is a very important role, and there should also be deputy lead workers designated as well. Employers should provide COVID-19 induction training for all workers. I can't stress how important a good induction is for employees returning to work. They would, it's on chartered territory. They will have a lot of questions with regards to the return to work protocol. Going back again, both the employer and employees have responsibilities. So if a business is to be successful and safe in reopening and to maintain being successful and being safe, it's important that workers aren't left in the dark, and the teams and the workers should have a very good knowledge of the return to work protocol and everything that's in it as well. So a good induction will be half the job in this scenario. This protocol also may be supplemented by further guidance. So it's very important to instill that flexibility and adaptability amongst your teams as well. There will be changes over the next few months going down the line. So it's important that there's, I suppose, a buy-in of that change, that acceptance to change, not a resistance to it, and that a flexibility and adaptability can be allowed from your people within your teams in your workplace. It's important that employers take into account workers' individual risk factors. So the return to work form, very important. I'll speak about that in a minute. But to distinguish between, I suppose, the employees who should be returning to work and the employees who shouldn't, because it's not safe for them to do so. So older workers, where there's the presence of underlying medical conditions, or people who are caring for people with underlying medical conditions, and so on. Include contingency measures to address increased rates of worker absenteeism, changing work patterns, transfers, cross-training, interim and relief staff, etc. So I suppose there is the possibility, again, for a lot of flexibility to be needed inside in workplaces. If a worker was to have a symptom, they would have to be removed from the workplace. They may not be there for a number of days. It may not just be one employee, it could be a number of employees. So there could be high rates of absenteeism inside in workplaces over the next few months. Changing work patterns. Important to review your HR policies and documentation, your employment contracts as regards working hours and things like that, because obviously there is going to be changing terms and conditions if workplaces are going to adhere to the return to work protocol and make the workplace safe and make their business safe for the public with regards to physical distancing and all of that. Obviously terms and conditions are going to have to change. So employers should be checking their sick leave policies, their annual leave policies, and so on, and make sure that they have a clear and transparent and fair and consistent policy in place that everyone understands and that is communicated to your teams. The ability to have, transfers across different areas, job titles, different departments and sites and so on. Cross-training may be very important. You need that flexibility in your workforce, and you need to allow, again, going back to absenteeism and so on, you need to allow perhaps for some interim or relief staff to come into your workplace. It may be something you need to consider. Develop all plans in consultation with workers and communicate once finalised. So again, going back to communication being key, engage your staff, don't leave them in the dark, because if you want this to be a success, they need to be involved, they need to be knowledgeable, they need a good induction, they need to know what's happening, and that ongoing engagement is vital. The return to work form. So issue the pre-return to work form for workers to complete at least 3 days in advance of the return to work date. Again, this is a necessity, it has to be done, but what is very important about this form is that it clearly distinguishes what employees are safe to return to work and what employees are not. I just want to deal with home working. It obviously is very important. The return to work protocol tells us that where home working can be provided, it should be provided for as long as possible during COVID-19. It's very important that employers, I suppose, have a formal arrangement and a formal agreement in place with employees who are operating from home or working remotely. So it's about getting a home working policy in place, and that is very, very important. There are 5 areas that need to be focused in on from a legal perspective. Number 1, obviously, again, health and safety. I suppose the same rules apply, but when someone is working remotely or from home, it's a different environment. So there are different challenges with regards to ergonomics and so on. Working hours, adhering to the Working Time Act, I suppose documentation and when the employee is available. So it's important again that there's an agreement in place with regards to working hours. Yes, home working can be more flexible, but it can also become a problem between employers and employees. So it's important that this documentation is in place. The next 2, data protection and confidentiality, very much so linked. Again, working from a home or remote environment, there's a different challenge with regards to data protection and confidentiality. So, these need to be clearly defined inside a home working policy. And then performance management and how you monitor employees. So again, that can be a bone of contention between employers and employees in home working or remote working scenarios. So it's important to get this down in a home working policy, have a formal agreement between the employer and the employee. Expense is something that often becomes an issue as well. Just to mention, there is a €3.20 per day tax-free allowance towards electricity, light and heat. This can be a tidy payroll option, but these are the types of things that should be set out inside in a home working policy. Otherwise, they may become a problem down the line. Employers should also reserve the right to amend a home working policy and oblige home workers to attend the office on request. So that little bit of flexibility as well from the employer's point of view. And employers should also be aware that if an employee works from home for an extended period, that the right to work from home could become an employee term of their contract through custom and practice. So again, there should be timeframes and review periods put on these formal arrangements. And, with regards to the expense there, the €3.20 per day, in a revenue audit, what the revenue require is a formal agreement between the employer and the employee to prove that that expense is allowable. So a formal arrangement, a home working policy, where you consider all of these things is very important from the employer's point of view. 10 things to look out for. I suppose these are some things that are just popping up, so some advice for you with regards to this. Number 1 there, where employers offer a return to employment to employees and it is then refused by the employee, documentation accounting for this should be kept. So again, that return to work policy is very important, the return to work form. Number 2, medical advice from a designated occupational health therapist should be available to the employer. It's very important, not just now, but always, that employers have medical advice at their disposal. Number 3, returning mothers, maternity leave expirations. So I suppose making the point that, you know, the usual employment law applies, but any mothers returning from maternity leave at the moment are obviously coming into a very different environment to what they left. So it's very difficult for employers to guarantee the exact same terms and conditions of employment. But it's something that employers need to be careful with in that circumstance, because employment law hasn't changed. Number 5, carers' underlying health conditions among staff, compassion must be shown. So going back to that return to work form again, and understanding how you can define between employees who can return to the workplace and employees who shouldn't. Number 6, the wage subsidy scheme and PUP tapering, the changes that are taking place there. So being aware of the wage subsidy scheme and how that can help you, and making sure you're aware of all the changes that are happening there over the next few months. Number 7 and 8 are related. I suppose making the point again, employment law has not changed. That is important. One thing that has changed is that redundancy legislation with regards to temporary laid off staff making claims for redundancy after being laid off after a certain period. That legislation has been put on hold. So just to watch out for that, because when the release button is pressed on that, it is maybe going to change the environment again. Number 9, it's a very important point, especially in these times, real-time information in line with business strategy. So with regard to your payroll costs, overheads, outgoings, cash flow, and the adaptation of your HR policy up against your business strategy to allow for swift responses from the business and its people in circumstances that will frequently change over the next few months. So almost operating on a week-to-week basis and having real-time information at your disposal. The final point, homeworking, again, having your time deadlines for review, policies developed or corrected, legal compliance assurance, and dealing with the expenses issue, etc. Some frequently asked questions with regards to employment, the wage subsidy scheme, and the return to work. So the first one there is, when an existing employee returns to work, can the employer keep them on the wage subsidy scheme? Yes is the answer to that. Can an employer change the terms and conditions of employment contracts, such as hours, start times, rates of pay? This is something that is going to have to be done within businesses, because obviously terms and conditions are going to have to change. Yes, the employer can change the employment contract. It must be seen as fair and not just moving the goalpost to suit the employer, but also the employee must agree to this. And obviously businesses are going to have to change employment contracts and terms and conditions therein. If a business does not reopen, what is the alternative for employees? Well, eventually it would be redundancy. Is an employer responsible for paying employees when they are off work sick? No, by law, no employer has to pay an employee when they are off work sick, but it also depends on what is in the employment contract under sick pay conditions. So again, the point is, make sure you review your existing terms and conditions in every employment contract, because there could be some old ones there may be some gaps. So make sure there's an employment contract there for everyone, and that it makes sense to the way you're going to be operating over the next few months. What if there is no employment contract? Very simply, get one now, as it is illegal to not have provided one. Can an employer refuse annual leave requests? This may be an issue that comes up later on in the year or later on in the summer. I suppose if restrictions relax, we may be allowed to take maybe some local holidays or some holidays nationally or something like that. Well, annual leave requests may be quite high at the one time. So it's important that employers review their annual leave policies and have a clear and consistent annual leave policy that is transparent to everyone, because that is something that may become difficult at one stage or another down the line. Can an employee simply refuse to return to work because they feel it is unsafe to do so? Well, I suppose no is the straight answer. That's what the return to work protocol and returning to work safely is about. Once the employer is adhering to the return to work protocols and all answers on the return to work form are no, the employee should return to their employment. Otherwise, they're simply just choosing to be unemployed. thanks very much, everyone. I hope that helps. The very best of luck, and thank you, and stay safe.